So this is something I don't know if there's a single string player that has not struggled with breathing while playing. And while I actually know professionals who don't feel like they can breathe very well when they play. So it's not that it like necessarily hampers your playing, but it hampers your feelings while you're playing, and like the whole thing just becomes really super intense. And I decided when I was going to give a class about this, because I've got like, I don't know, like 25 years, actually more than that, because I myself had to do this as a student. I had all this like anecdotal insight about like breathing and playing and what it did, but I decided if I was actually going to be talking to a bunch of smart people, I had better do some real research. So I went on Google Scholar. I read a bunch of literature reviews, and some studies, and read a book, read excerpts of a book just about this. And as it turns out, all the anecdotal stuff was pretty accurate. So even though this sounds very fancy neurobiological explanation, basically breathing, it affects your mind and your body. It's not just one or the other. So basically, when we are concentrating deeply, like we do when we practice, or when we're taking a test, or doing anything that we perceive as difficult, the body suppresses a bunch of processes that are sort of necessary to long-term survival, but not moment-to-moment survival. So, for instance, I'm sure you've been doing something uh, deeply engrossing, and then you're like, I haven't eaten, right? Stuff like, and it's, and this has even happened to me, and I'm hypoglycemic. So like I go off the rails if I don't if I don't eat. So it's really easy, and there's a kind of natural explanation for why this happens. So when you've got a task that is perceived as very, very important, breathing is basically one of the very first things that suffers. So let me get into this one. But also, and I'm sure you've experienced this, it doesn't just, you're not just suppressing your breathing. What ends up happening is a stress response. And basically, what happens is the body, you all know that people, for instance, can be brain dead, right? Their hearts continue to beat, but there's just nothing going on here. A lot of time that's actually happened due to situations where they've been deprived of oxygen for a certain amount of time. So what happens is basically 6 seconds into holding your breath, the body goes, we might be in a fatality situation here. Even though, of course, we're not in a fatality situation, but that's kind of why also practice can feel so freaky, because your body is saying, so if I've got to keep the body alive, I'm actually going to not send all the nutrients and the oxygen and the blood so much to your brain. We're going to keep the heart beating because that's what keeps the body alive. So it it definitely has like a very quick physiological response when we hold our breath. And so I've got this sort of non-rhetorical question here. What happens to like cognition and attention and to fine detail when the body enters like a stress response? Just somebody jump in if they have either a theory or personal experience with it.
you,
Well,
your fine motor skills go, and you get tangled up if you're trying to do something delicate. You're going to drop it, you're going to make a mistake. That's the first thing that happens usually
right.
to me.
Well, absolutely. And because, of course, if your body is in fatality mode, right, like getting an F sharp in tune is like very low on the priority list. And often, and we'll talk about this kind of a bunch tonight, sometimes it feels like your playing is happening to you, as opposed to like it's a thing that kind of you're navigating and being very aware of what you're physically doing on the instrument. And being in, even if you're breathing, you can be breathing and still actually be in a fight or flight mode. Um, but it happens a lot quicker if your breath is being constricted. And yeah, the whole experience is just kind of blunted, and you definitely plummet a couple levels compared to how you would normally achieve. Same thing with actually long-term memory. this is something I have huge experience with. So I had a pretty traumatic childhood, and being in a fight or flight mode actually changes the way our brain prioritizes just any kind of functioning. And so there's like lots of studies where people who have really gnarly childhoods, they have like glimpses of memories, but then like whole years will sometimes be absent. And we used to think, well, maybe this is just the brain protecting itself, which I suppose there could be something of that. But it actually is when your body is trying to be alive. Number one, is long-term memory the priority? Absolutely not, right? Hyper awareness, vigilance, perceived threats, which is, so that's a very extreme example. But in your practice, when we are perceiving a threat like a massive shift, or right? Or it's so funny though, doesn't it feel like, why is it that there are certain notes even today, because I trained myself in a couple pieces when I was in like a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and instability in my life. And there are still notes where I'm as scared of these notes as if somebody, the boogeyman, was like right outside of that door. But it's a note. There's zero penalty to missing a note, but it's like the fear is so real. So just kind of, I'm selling you. I'm like, this is why you have to take this seriously, because this is also a skill that's going to push back on you. Because if it was easy to breathe while you play, none of us would be here. And I wouldn't have thought about it for a long time. So just like, we got to prioritize this. So as I was saying, like over time, the stress contributes to how a piece feels, but it also contributes how we feel when we play our instrument. And I know lots of really fine cellists who, and I say cellists just because that's mostly who I'm teaching, and there's just like a low key constant dread during playing. And we really have to think like, why would that be? And I think a lot of us just accept it, right? And we're just gnarly and we're like, yeah, I dread this, but I know the only way to get better is to come back to it. And I want to improve more than I'm afraid of the dread. And while that's great and that's extremely punk rock and it is what you need to do to continue, what I'm hoping is that this, and maybe some other classes that I do too, can kind of start filing away at the aspect of dread and unpleasantness, and that we can just see this more as a process that just sort of has patient, inevitable progress and difficulty, but it doesn't have to trigger terror or feelings of like low self-worth or stress, or however your childhood says the cello should feel. So also, this is what I did first. So I was really obsessed with breathing, and I knew I wasn't breathing well. And I've been seeing neurologists for a long time because I've always had like nerve, neck, weird things. And I remember I actually injured myself with incorrect breathing techniques. So does anybody here know or have experience with what they call paradoxical breathing? It's bananas. You see it more in hospital with people who've like had a pneumothorax or like a lung get punctured. But basically, paradoxical breathing is something that can happen. By the way, one of the reasons that we can breathe incorrectly is if we're sucking in all the time. Now, I am from Los Angeles, and it was very important for me to look skinny and appealing all the time while I played, because every one of my gigs was an audition for a music video or for whatever. And I wish it wasn't true, but at least for women, your looks are very much part of whether you get a lot of gigs, at least in Los Angeles. So the thing is, when you normally breathe, there should be a little bit of gut in and out, and your gut and your diaphragm should be relatively soft. But since I was always trying to have a very kind of rock hard appearing and also very nice looking posture, when I would breathe in, I kind of like my body would like go the wrong way. And when I breathed out, things would go up and back. doing all kinds of really strange things with our secondary breathing muscles. So the first thing we breathe with when we think about the lungs and the diaphragm, right, goes up and down and in and out. So our scalenes and sternocleidomastoid, those are kind of these guys on the side of the neck. They are actually secondary, so meaning they assist in the motion when they're acting correctly. And since mine were not acting correctly, they actually moved the opposite of a bellows when I was breathing. So I actually hurt myself. So that's just kind of one of these things to be aware of, that breathing, even it can be done wrong, right? So I just like to imagine though a very soft Santa Claus gut, sweatpants forever. I'm wearing jeans because I want to look nice for you guys. But honestly, I like to have a feeling of like softness and slight sagginess when I'm trying to relax and get into breathing. All right, so staying in your body. Sounds a little hippie and new age, and I am a little bit hippie and new age, to be honest. But does anybody understand what this slide means? Because I don't know about you, but for years I feel like I was playing like I was watching my body, but like all of the playing happened in my mind. Does anybody feel
Mhm.
like sympathy with that? Like it feels like a brain thing? Yeah?
Yeah.
Right. And
Constant thinking. There's too many things.
right, and granted, there is a certain level of academic knowledge, right? The first thing we have to do is hunt down what are these notes. You do have to use the front of your brain, decode all these things. And then it's like, okay, and then what are these rhythms? Again, okay, doing a little bit of math and interpreting the bowing. But from there on out, even if the notes are not perfectly in tune or whatnot, all of the adjustments happen here. And yes, of course, our brain is controlling this, but this is what we actually need to be aware of. But sometimes it can be very difficult to transfer from hunting down the notes mode to curating what my body does. That is a necessary and extremely positive and very groovy step to take, because once you are focused on your body, you are much less likely, number one, to repeat patterns that cause injury, but also it's still a complicated task, but each one has a very simple answer, right? I need to shift further. I need my thumb to stay up next to my first finger. I need my thumb to open up on the back of the neck. So yes, there are lots of these little things, and because professionals play and practice for years and years, that never ends. But they are all like rather simple, elegant things that we do with our body, as opposed to like kind of using cognition, that front of the brain, absolutely all the time. Okay, so here, before we get into playing, there's a couple things that help when you're starting any of this. Number one, just playing whatever it is slowly. And number two, actually probably number two might be the most important. I say reducing the bow burden. So making, students of mine, I've got a couple of them in here, they know all about crunchy bows. So, I was looking at this damned Kabalevsky concerto because I have a student who wants to learn it. He's trying to kill me, but I'm reviewing the Kabalevsky. But I was noticing I was holding some tension, and so I decided to reduce the bow burden so that these nightmare runs are hitting the stand. Right? Because sure, it's supposed to be much faster and it's supposed to be completely lyrical, but I'm not up to that yet. And I want to learn with all of the comfort and good habits. I need to take that with me. And if I learn a passage not breathing or allowing myself to feel terror, that just kind of woven into the fabric of what that passage is going to feel like, right? And then an open mindset. This one is really kind of key because I bet all of you guys you're probably not all type A, but you have a real desire to get better, like a real fire for this. So in the next couple weeks, especially if you find this problematic, if it doesn't yield to you, I'd like your goal-oriented self to take take a quick time out and be more curious about what is going on than goal-oriented, and as in like I need to do this. I need to do this right. It's just better if at the end of every practice, for instance, if you write a note about how it went. So at the end of my Kabalevsky, my note would be, I'm playing it okay, slow. Every now and again, when I go to this higher position, I have a spike of anxiety. And so next time I'm going to practice that shift just back and forth a bunch of times. Just kind of, okay, just take some stock. All right. So, and then you ask yourself, where am I holding tension? Because tension and breathing, I find that learning to breathe eases tension. And I suppose it could have the reciprocal. I'm sure that being more relaxed would help you breathe, but I find that the breathing is a much more persuasive habit than just releasing tension. And then we're going to try to pay attention to the larger structures. So arms as opposed to fingertips, you know, elbows, shoulders, even your sit bones. Just kind of that helps you check in with your body. Okay, here we go. Here's the actual stuff. So I'm going to demonstrate. So everybody make sure you are on mute, because otherwise we'll get everybody crashing into each other in the sound. So I'm saying make a slight T sound. Actually, I'll tell you why I started doing this. I learned to breathe when I played in 1997 when I was doing an orchestra at Disney. It's like my first big orchestra professional gig down in Florida. And I was watching a French horn player plan where she was going to phrase, and like the violins or somebody was being worked with, and she was sitting there, and here's what she looked like she was doing. And what I was like, that's so interesting. And also, all of her attention was on the out breath. And the in breaths were these short little sips, just like when we're talking, which is, by the way, what we are aiming for. This is not quite like yoga breath where it's like big in, long out. We might take little sips and we might have long exhales sometimes. But so what I was doing is I decided I would start playing like that. So I'm going to demonstrate first. And you can choose, by the way, a t, or you can go, it's just, we want to introduce something that's speech-like into it. So in my E flat scale, first off, I exhale everything out. That's the most important thing for all of this. So just get it all out. Wow, those are a lot of exhales. Inhales will take care of themselves for the most part. So let's just have you guys do, let's have you do 1 or 2 minutes of this. And then if anybody has questions, I'm here and I would love to hear them, but let's experiment. Very, very small bows, nothing grandiose, nothing fast. And you can keep playing even when I'm talking. No problem, play right over me. Get a look at everybody. With these short bows, they should not have any additional downforce. It should be a resting lazy arm that is moving back and forth like a robot. Low elbows, low shoulders are going to be helpful here. Do not go for good tone, go only for breathing. Let's do 1 more minute of this, and then I would love to hear whether it was successful or not. So about 10 more seconds, just so folks can like really give it a shot. And then, does anybody feel like they had an abject failure, or did anybody feel like this is something that maybe I can try a little bit more? Nobody will be required to play in front of everybody, I promise.
I have a question or something.
I'd love it.
I know when we're doing this, it seems like if you're doing, you're also heavy on the bow. And I'm wondering, is it something you could do legato bowing, or if you do it or is your arm going to automatically be strong?
Okay. So, and it shouldn't be strong. And I think maybe I gave a strong impression because I was like trying to demonstrate so it would come through. It can actually also be just like you're saying, like to an animal or something. This eventually becomes legato. So absolutely it can be. Gonna hit you with some Algar. Got my cello piece.
Yeah.
Let's do it. But what we
Okay.
don't want is to have the breath mirror the music, because if you're playing something super intense, your body's gonna get really intense, and this whole thing is actually about like letting it go so that you can play something that sounds intense, but inside you're like cool, right? And that's an excellent question. But also, even when I was slurring, I was doing it on every note. If that works, great. But you can also do it. I prefer it on every note because one of the last slides on this thing is like, don't link your breathing to your bow changes, because you are going to be you're going to be in a world of hurt on Beethoven 5. No, when do you breathe during that, right? You hyperventilate. I mean, it would be a great story. You're like, Tamarack Arts taught me to go to the hospital playing Beethoven. You wouldn't be the first. But yeah, that is actually a good question. And a lot of this is about just finding something that seems feasible and then customizing it to what works for you. And then at the bottom, I'm saying only worry about the exhales. Inhales really do come on their own. And as like morbid as this is, I always tell everybody, this is why people drown. Even when there is no air, the body at some point will take a giant inhale. So like, don't worry about it too much, or it will take a little inhale. Like actually legato playing, I think it's maybe easier to do little inhales. But yeah, find out what works for you. And again, you guys will all get this as a PDF, so no need to like take fastidious notes. Also, this is going to be on YouTube if you want to rewatch it. All right, here we go. Count out loud or hum quietly as you play. This is just another version of the same thing, but counting as you play actually is also useful, right? Especially in a passage that's got you a little whipsaw where you're like, what is even going on? And I like to make the counting when you're learning to breathe kind of mellow. So 2, 1, right? And part of actually how I learned to do this was teaching and talking. I realized I was really loose when I was talking to my students as I was demonstrating. So let's start out with, let's do hum. And by the way, it doesn't even have to be like a real note. I do not have a great voice range, especially after this last neck surgery. But let's see, let me do something that's not, yeah, actually it can just be that bach. I'm not really singing notes, right? Right? So doing that, again, it's just another way to push the air out of your lungs and encourage these little inhales. So if you want to work on your piece, that's fine. I was a bit of a bad exemplar there. It should be much slower because you are learning to do this. But also, if that doesn't seem possible, like your piece, it's just too much, just do something like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on your string and go ba be ba da dee da dee dee. Right? Just find something that feels simple to the left hand and the right hand, because the breathing is the point. And if your notes slide, who cares? Absolutely play while I'm talking. Go, go, go. None of this is so important. I will wave you off if it's that important. Let's do 2 minutes of this. If you want to try counting, that's also fine. Sometimes staying in the lower half of the bow is easier for this. I've got people in the chat, but I can't see. All right. Let's do like 30 more seconds. Also, you can compare this against the previous slide if you want to go back and seeing if the was easier, better, more instinctive for you. It's nice to shuffle these things and just see if all you need is one, and the other ones will follow. It's about 10 more seconds, and then I would love to hear again questions or comments, or if one of them seems a lot harder. All right, any feedback, questions, clarifications?
It's actually pretty hard to do, to talk and to play at the same time for me.
And was that saying something that was not a word, or were you counting?
I was just trying to say anything at the same time I was playing. Just say anything, not count or anything.
Can I ask what you were playing?
Oh, I'm just learning this Franck Sonata, the movement 2 on it.
That's a good piece. Here's what I would do. So if you think about, like, if you were totally by yourself and you wanted, because you know that piece is like a massive earworm, right? Like certain melodies like get in your head, and like it's so beautiful. I'm so glad we stole it from the violin.
Yeah.
So but basically, for instance, like again, this Kavalevsky, I find myself when I'm like cleaning the house or something, I'll be going. Now, obviously, that is not the range of notes, right? Like it's a much bigger range, and I'm just kind of doing like this weird abstract. When you sing to yourself, first of all, actually, do you ever sing to yourself? Okay, great. Do you have a syllable? Like some people do da or ba or da ba or ti, or like there's a lot of different ones. Did you choose that one?
No, I go da 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 da.
Da, exactly. Da is like very, very common actually. So taking it slowly, I'm wondering if maybe if you even just try 4 notes, is there a speed at which you think you could say da, even if you're not moving exactly with the piece? I feel you need to go with what's natural, but also this is kind of what I'm talking about. If breathing is not something that we've been able to do easily, it pushes against you. And so that's why I always say just be more curious about what is easier and what isn't than worried about whether you succeeded this time or not. But also sometimes it can help to repeat it a couple times. So yum dee 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 yum dee 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 yum dee 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 da yum dee 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 yum dee 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 da yum dee 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 da yum dee 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 da dee wee or it can even be ba ba, like I'm just being basically a human metronome, right? I'm like right on the downbeats. Just find a way to basically introduce a percussive exhale wherever it seems natural to you. By the way, it doesn't even have to be correlating to the beats. We just want you to wring some of that air out of your lungs. That's all it is. Okay, I love your questions. Okay, here is a good one, not just for breathing, but also for combating the freak out of playing in front of other people. So a long, slow, audible exhale. And slow is really important because we think about deep breaths, and here's what we do. And then right? We like explode like a balloon. I'm like, I feel relaxed after that. No. And I don't know, I mean, some of you are people who I've met before, but if you haven't, I'm sure you can already tell I am not somebody who relaxes as like part of my natural makeup. I am on absolutely all the time. My brain is an absolute circus. And because this matters so much to me, I get terribly afraid playing in front of other people. Not because I'm a chicken or because I'm not prepared, but because it matters so much to me that my body just kind of reacts to it. So this is something that one of my teachers actually at Cal State Northridge taught me. So you want to do 2 long out breaths. You can count or not, but with a lot of resistance. So this is a little bit of yoga breathing. Tell me, like, just raise your hand if you can hear what I'm doing on my exhale. So it's like an H sound, almost like making the sound of the ocean in the back of your throat. Here's why. The slowness of that exhale actually goes to, one of my friends in the FBI says, this is a way you depress your galvanic stress response. Your heart and blood pressure go down, you actually sweat a little bit less. And he was like, so this is your first step in, defeating that lie detector. I'm like, look, I know I'm like a wacko, but like I don't think I'm going to be in a lie detector position anytime soon. But who knows? The day is long and it's early. Anyway, so that H, if you have a yogic or meditative practice, that might already be familiar to you. Otherwise, I sometimes try to do it like I'm blowing out a candle from far away. Basically, you just want 10 seconds of exhale. So without playing, just do a couple of those out through the mouth, I think. Or if you've got the yoga one, just with a ton of resistance. Whatever your inhale is, the exhale should be 3 times longer at least. Has anybody here heard of a box breath? Because this is kind of part of a box breath, right? In for whatever increment. I was taught in for 4, hold for 4, out for 8, right? Okay, so first thing I do when I'm about to play for people and I'm nervous, I will do a couple of those long exhales. It has a direct response, or a direct effect on the, we've all had the shaky bow, right? Like it strikes during lessons. It hardly ever happens when you practice, but like as soon as there is like one single eyeball on you, you're like, great, ideal, I love it. So resting your bow on the string, doing that. And then I find that if you play at the tail end of one of those long exhales, especially having done a couple of them before, again, if you're, just make your goal the ringing of your lungs, ring it all out. That inhale just comes whether I want it or not. And if you feel like I can't do that because the notes are too hard, all it means is that you're playing the music too quickly, because we are introducing a complete new skill. So just because you can play your Kabalevsky when you're holding your breath, you have to actually take your foot off the gas and realize that this is a skill like vibrato, like playing with your thumb, like spiccato. It is a technique. It makes everything else harder for a quick second. So how about, we can do one together actually. Go ahead and put your bow on, I'm gonna put my bow on the G string. I just like where that puts my shoulder. It's very chilled out. Like, you can play whatever string you want, but you'll sound good against mine if it's with a G. And what we're gonna do is, let's do little inhale here, and let's try to exhale for 8. So inhale, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One more in. And again, don't worry if you totally get it. 2, 3, exhale, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now you're stuck to the string, right? Nobody's got their hands off of their instrument. Good. So now what we're gonna do is, you can follow me because I think you can hear my breathing. I'll be kind of obnoxious on my inhale sound. Me obnoxious. So halfway through my exhale, I'm just gonna play a couple open G's. So here we go. And then you join me when I go. And at some point, we have to breathe in. Go a little softer if that helps. 2 or 3 more bows, slower and slower each time. Last one, the very slow exhale. Take your bow off. I did a lot of fast bows there. That might make it harder. Did this particularly flummox or appeal to anybody? Did you feel like the instructions were not clear? Happy to hear any like clarifications or anything, or did it seem like a way forward, like maybe something you could try?
Any particular instructions for when you change bow direction?
Yeah.
Did anything match up with that?
So I'll tell you this. In the end, we do not want to match up our bows and our breath. But if so, I like to do it right before I change. So to be like in, out. I feel like that's really good battle training because we tend to not. It would be really a heck of a coincidence if where we naturally wanted to take a breath was always with our bow. But if you find that you just can't find any other way into breathing, absolutely start there. And then what you can do is you can fool yourself if you just make a pact that no matter what, you're going to keep the note going. And at some point during this very, very long bow, you will need to breathe. And also it's okay if you force the inhale, if you go and like you make a big deal out of it, it's absolutely fine just to start working on like separating these two processes so that they can support each other as opposed to hinder each other. Of course, the exhale is always the most important, but I know I've watched students turn purple at the end of an exhale and just being like, nope, this is not possible. So again, be more curious than goal-oriented. If you have to stop your bow or if you have to breathe when you change bows, I don't know, that's a B plus. That really isn't, that's not much of a failure. That's just like, maybe you're on level 101 and where you want to be is, level 405. I'm doing college class numbers here if you were curious. All right, so we've got, okay, the sigh, and I did a little bit of that. A sigh that's actually kind of theatrical. So, so stupid, right? Like I feel like a dummy even doing that. But for some reason, going from high to low in your voice, I feel like it's very helpful for also releasing the shoulders and also something we don't talk about enough, not taking yourself so seriously. Because like what is serious is injuring yourself doing the thing you love. What is serious is feeling emotionally blocked on the instrument because you feel like you're made out of rocks or you're like not feeling the instrument when you're playing. So the only way that this can be serious is if you don't pay attention to breathing and playing in your body. So, but yeah, the sigh can just be, it's really good if it's one of like either exasperation or, when you've had a really good massage and they say, okay, thank you, I'll see you up at the front. And then they close the door and you go, It can be that as well. But just something that's audible and lengthy. So I'm not going to make you try that because if you watch the news, we're sighing like this all the time. I just want to introduce this into your playing and just as one of the strategies, especially if you find that when you finish a note and you're like, Jiminy Christmas, I am really, you're going to be in a better place. Again, something also, like, I want you to really fight against the idea of like some mythical level of perfect breathing. What this is a coping mechanism to breathe most of the time and to be aware when your breath becomes held and to have tools to release it. So, right, I teach all the time about injury prevention, playing very loosely, and breathing. And I play with tension and I hold my breath sometimes. But the reason it doesn't hamper me is that within about a second or two of acquiring the tension or stopping breathing, I'm aware of it and I can just let it go. So it's not a problem if you're aware of it and kind of sort it out now and again. All right, so then we've got this. This is kind of a very, like, if you just find that none of this is working for you, introduce stops, and you can choose where they are. If you've got something with like very long measures, you could either do the middle of the measure or the end of the measure, and you can do a breath both directions. I'm always encouraging people to start on an exhale. So I've got an inhale here, but I'm gonna let it out. Or I felt like I needed to breathe in the two groups of three here. So basically, you just agree that the playing stops and then you breathe. And eventually you can start either, there will be a point where either the music gets easier or the breathing gets easier. Also, again, I'm being a bit of a bad exemplar because that's like 2/3 of the way to performance speed. You might want to take it down because the breathing does introduce a complication. So how about we do another kind of 2 minutes here where you take whatever you've got going and just when you need to breathe, you stop, in or out, but make sure you start the next thing in the middle of an out. Let's do 2 minutes here. 2 real minutes. Got 1 more minute. And remember, you can also like use all of the strategies. You can make your bows single bows, tiny bows, heavy bows. I fed BB, by the way. I don't know if you could hear our musical cat. She was like, "Meep." So we probably have another like 30 seconds. And actually what I'd like to do before I go to the next slide is have you actually just sit with your bow on whatever string you've got going and just breathe a little bit. Focus on the breathing while your bow is on your instrument. I know you can't see my bow. And just notice what your natural breathing feels like when you're sitting at the instrument. Not when you're being a thoughtful, meditative breather, just when you're just being a person who's sitting and breathing. All right, so does this method seem better, worse, more feasible, less feasible? This is really me conducting research, so I appreciate when you chime in, actually, because this is the first time I've taught such a large group of people these techniques.
I have a thought on the stops. That was the hardest one for me because I'm stopping wrongly normally. So so the stopping is hard because I don't want to introduce more stops because I do that already. But one of the things I noticed on that one is I used to run and so I never breathe when I play. I'm surprised I get through any pieces. I hold my breath, I think, which I didn't realize until we started talking about it. But I have a rhythm, which I forgot about, that I use when I run, that I was using on this piece. And you said stops, but for some reason the running rhythm came in and it was really cool. I had never thought about using that. And it's not quite it's the same on the exhale, kind of like the H sound or the T sound.
Right.
Is my running rhythm. And
yeah,
that's
my running rhythm. Yeah, I was.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I can still hear like the crunching of the and it's so funny because running is something that like it requires real oxygenation of your body, and because the cello is like, you know, we talk about being athletes, but it's a very weird small sport, right? Like it needs our whole body, but it's not nearly as like you have to breathe as running. Right. I love that. Also, let's see, do I have it on this next one? Okay, we've got, actually, okay, so with this one, because I'm pretty sure I didn't mention it, another thing to do that's actually kind of riffing on what Karen was saying is moving. So just because anything that can get you feeling your body as a whole, because your body as a whole breathes all the time, right? Like you sleep, and you're breathing, and you're talking and you're breathing and you're working. Although apparently, what do they call it? They call it email apnea. I think when like you're composing, especially like a fraught email, that's actually a term. You can search it. Parsons, the raccoons are asking for snacks. We have raccoon faces in the windows like this right now, so we got to give them some seeds. Then they don't ravage the neighborhood trash cans. Anyway, but during any high concentration thing, like we can hold like emails. But when you move and you become conscious of your body, two things will usually happen. If you don't move, you're going to feel like your playing is totally off the rails. Normal, fine. But also, it does kind of encourage your body to act like your body when you are not playing. So usually the rule of thumb is you move with the direction of the bow. And I like to actually start it kind of small, because when we talk about moving, we get kind of histrionic, right? We think about like two cellos going crazy, or just big moves, Elisa Weilerstein. And I actually think it's more like you feel a difference in your sit bones, where it's like just you transfer like 30% of your weight to one and 30%. So it's something almost like you would feel more than feeling. So again, let's always try to start on the exhale. By the way, hear that? That was not a nice bow change, right? A little juddery. It actually does not matter. Our tone does not matter in this exercise because we're working on breathing and playing. Tone will come later. Just a little side to side, and then you can sometimes work that into your scale. Also, you can do actually the bows that I was just doing there, kind of Baroque sounding, because I'm playing very light with zero expectation of beautiful tone. Very difficult for us to do because we play this thing for the beautiful tone. But actually, if you just allow yourself to have kind of crummy tone, but your body feels good, after a couple minutes, you will be able to then get back in touch with all of the things that you've been working on in your lessons for your whole life, or for the past 6 months, or however long you've been playing. Those things will come back to you. But when you introduce a new skill, especially one that is very resistant to being introduced, like breathing, you should expect and almost welcome your other skills to feel a little destabilized. They don't vanish. We're just adding something very strenuous to the CPU of like what it feels like to play the instrument. So really forgive yourself if you get juddery bow changes or anything like that. We're just trying to get you really, again, sounds so hippie, but back into your body when you're playing. All right, so long tones. This is kind of what I was talking about, but long tones are even longer than this. So in the traditional context, long tones are something the brass players do, because you can imagine they have a little bit of the same relationship with the breath and the bow. Basically, imagine that a French horn player needs to play a long, beautiful note that remains the same dynamic level throughout. What happens towards the end of the note naturally if they don't have good breath support? Right? The sound either decrescendos or it strains. Very much like, when we get to the end of our bow, and if your mechanics aren't kosher, or if you're dealing with a sore shoulder, we get a natural decrescendo towards the end of the bow. So originally, I started doing long tones for myself and with my students just to make sure that I can get whatever sound I want consistently throughout the whole bow. That's not, by the way, just can I play like a cannon all the way through, although I do enjoy playing very loud. But also, can I play, an orchestral mezzo piano all the way through? And then what you'll notice when you do long tones, and this is just kind of a string player geeky thing that we're going to use with breathing, what you will notice that there's usually a spot or two where your sound isn't what you want. A lot of us have like a rough sounding bow change at the frog. For me, it's these kind of last couple inches here. Sometimes the sound actually just gets really rough and gritty. And so I know what I need to do. Anyway, so you do these long tones, and we're listening for beautiful tone, and then also for the most gentle breath. Since we're not changing notes, you do a long tone on a single note. I once did, I thought that my neighbors couldn't hear me, so I remember I was doing like, I think it was B and B flat, and I did B for like 3 minutes. 3 minutes on a note is a very long time. And when I changed to B flat, the neighbors applauded. Like I didn't know they could hear me through the wall. Oh my God, so embarrassing. So yeah, I also, that's not very exciting for them to listen to. Anyway, but when you, let's do it, note down here. You can also, because you're not changing notes, you can hum with yourself. Much easier than when we're changing notes frenetically and having to match those things. That is not easy. And you can just do it every now and again. You don't have to sing the whole time. Or you can be doing this and you can be singing the letters of the piece or something else. It doesn't really matter, right? Again, because I am encouraging things to exhale. That's what this thing does. But long tones, just to be a string playing nerd, long tones are just like vitamins for your playing. They're good for your playing. It helps you get to know these things. But also, I don't know about you, but I'm busy and sometimes I feel like fired out of a cannon when I'm practicing. Like, I gotta get this done. I have all these things I have to do and I need to progress on this. And sometimes I just feel like I cannot spend 4 minutes on a single note. I've got 97,000 notes in here that need learning and my student needs me to learn them. But it's like, actually 3 minutes, if you spend 3 minutes on a single note developing beautiful tone, that is an investment in who you are as a player, right? As opposed to the short-term goal of, not freaking out, measure, let's be honest, 41 of the first page of the Kabalevsky. So it's good for all kind of things. It's good for changing your mind if you're having a struggle bus practice. Just like kind of do a couple long tones and remember, you don't even have to succeed at them. You can have a garbage tone the entire time as long as you notice what's going on. It's crunchy garbage at the frog, it peters out in the middle, and the tip, my elbow hurts. That is very good information, and every private teacher would love for you when they say, how was your week? To say, this is what I've noticed. So they're just a wonderful place to kind of really get to know your instrument, your arm, your mechanics, all that good stuff. So here are the last 2 slides with emojis. So mostly I'm saying don't get into the habit of, planning your breathing with where you're changing your bow. If it's the only way you can breathe and play at the beginning, okay. But I think the better thing to do is to sound terrible while you breathe, rather than not being willing to sacrifice your tone because the breathing makes your playing sound chaotic or feel chaotic. But yeah, you can just understand that like playing, something with a very long hold. Good grief, if I had to wait for a breath on that long G, I would be done. I would be purple, which is a beautiful color for a PowerPoint slide, but not for my face. So just trying to encourage you to not slave these things together where one has to happen for the other. And then give yourself, oh, look at this. There's a typo. Give yourself to acquire this skill. Go on, who wants to put the word in there? Give yourself money. Give yourself a hard time. Parsons, what do you think? Give yourself a raccoon? Yeah. Literally, they're like little bandits on our window. If you are very good, you over there. Give yourself time to acquire this skill. Yes, but you do actually have to place it at the forefront of not your whole practice. I'm not going to ask you to become like monastic about this because that's unreasonable and also punishing. But if you want to do little sips of this kind of practice throughout your playing, let's say you have a half an hour, just do this for 2 minutes at the beginning, and then when you're changing, or if you need a break because a piece is just savaging you, go ahead and do 2 more minutes of it then, and just see if it feels like, well, after I've been doing this, maybe I feel encouraged to try it a little bit more. And so what this feels like is being a breather who is playing rather than somebody for whom like breathing might be this optional, non-existential exercise. And again, it is okay if your playing gets sloppy for a moment. And this is what I say about any new technique. anything new at all, especially if you're making a technical correction, let's say you're a big pronator like this, of course your intonation is going to go crazy once we get your wrist correct, because we just changed everything about your arm, but we haven't changed everything about how you hear the notes and where they are. So like, we're not throwing the whole thing out, but it might feel chaotic, less controlled, but actually we don't want that feeling of control. We actually want our playing to be a feeling of release and breathing and release. Like, that's the whole thing, right? How many times have you been like right about to get into a fight with your spouse and you go, and the day is saved because you've released it all, right? That's what breathing actually does for our playing too. So I'm going to stop the screen share. How do I get to stopping the screen share? I do it this way. Haha. Boom. All right, so now it is open to any questions.